welcome to another video. And today it is the 7th of February. Before I get into the video, I want to thank everybody for 20,000 subs. Honestly, that number is crazy. I can't even wrap my head around 20,000 subs. That's just insane. So I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all of you. So I really am grateful for everybody giving me this opportunity and sticking by and watching all the videos, liking and subbing. Even to the people who dislike or write negative comments, I still appreciate it, because then it goes into boosting my videos in the algorithm. But anyway, I want to get into the frontline update. I don't have too much changes to talk about, but I do want to just give some updates about certain sectors that I sort of ignored. Not really because of any malice, just because I was focusing on more important sectors. But now I have a little bit of time to mention them. I do want to go in depth about each specific front in a different video, but that's just for a later time. Now I just want to give a broad update so everybody knows generally what's going on, because I haven't uploaded over the past 2 days, I believe. Okay, so we're going to start out with the Zaporizhzhia front. So if you recall, a week or two ago, we had a lot of talk about potential Russian offensives aimed at taking over the city of Orikhiv, the city here, which is one of the main Ukrainian defensive nodes. And the idea was that the Russians would try attacking the town from several axes by taking over the suburbs and then advancing along the roads and the open fields, sort of creating a cauldron that would isolate the town and create basically this valley where Russia could just fire artillery into these low elevation areas that Ukraine would be stationed in, and would force them to withdraw. The idea was that Russia would take Novoandrivka, Novodanilivka, Malotokmachka, Vuhledar, and then they'd be able to basically envelop Orikhiv. So none of that actually ended up happening. The Russians, I will say, they made some minor advances in the direction of the suburbs. But first of all, they don't have a foothold in any of the suburbs like these towns over here. You could actually change the marking from black to blue, because Ukraine actually does have a pretty solid control over most of the suburbs besides Vuhledar. Vuhledar is the only one that's still contested. And in terms of the open fields, Russia has, you could say, advanced in some of those areas, which means maybe they took over a few more trench lines or a few more bush lines. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not going to contribute much to whether Orikhiv falls or not. So, to be honest, all of that fighting that was going on a week or two ago, that was mainly positional in nature. Maybe it was meant to fix Ukrainian troops. If that was the idea, then you could make the argument that it was effective. But if it was meant at making significant gains, then you could say that it wasn't successful, because Ukraine was able to counterattack and reclaim control over these two towns, Mali Sitreps and Sitreps, and at this point, I haven't seen any changes. They're still in control of it. I would actually say that the Russians have basically withdrawn to their previous lines, and so this road leading from Mali Sitreps to Orikhiv is now up and running again. The Ukrainians can use it effectively, which means that they are able to transport supplies and men across the front line more easily than they were able to before. And so besides that, there really isn't any changes to the front line. What we're hearing is that Ukraine is sending reinforcements. They're trying to build defensive fortifications, of course, in Orikhiv and Kamyansk, Hulepolsky, the same main towns that have been a part of the defensive node for so long. They're trying to reinforce them, so they're not going actively on the offensive, because they are anticipating more Russian offensives beforehand. So we're going to see if Russia builds up. I don't have exact information about whether Russia is building up in Zaporizhzhia or not, but according to the Ukrainian General Staff, they are expecting some sort of Russian offensive operation over the coming months. Now, if we move on to Vuhledar, something similar happened where Russia did launch at least some preliminary assaults. People could argue about whether or not it was a full-scale offensive, but we did see some offensive operations aimed at taking Vuhledar, or aimed at advancing towards the coal mine, and those have basically dissipated at this point. We're not seeing them go on at the same scale that they were at the time. So there's some reasons that I've seen on both sides explaining why this has occurred. First of all, on the Russian side, they're saying that there was some very bad weather over the past few days, which basically prevented mechanized assaults and made it difficult for Russian infantry to advance through open fields towards Vuhledar. So they're saying that they put it on pause for that reason. If we look at the Vuhledar weather, just a simple Google search, we could look at the temperature forecast for the next few days. next week, next 10 days. If you look through, you can see it's in like the 30-degree, like in the ballpark of 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And honestly, it's not that bad. If you look at precipitation, though, like for most of this week, it's not supposed to be that bad. Friday, Saturday, there might be some. It's just mostly sunny, but there may be some cloud cover, which means there might be some precipitation. And Sunday, there's supposed to be some. They're saying there will be snow showers and all. Same thing on Tuesday. But again, for the most part, it is supposed to be at least mostly sunny. So in terms of weather, I don't really know if it's that big of a factor. Maybe it's one of multiple factors which is making it more difficult for Russia to advance, because advancing through these open fields is very difficult when you have, first of all, these Ukrainian artillery batteries that have M777s or have Caesars that are stationed pretty far away from the front line that could launch accurate pinpoint strikes onto advancing Russian columns. So that's an issue. So you see all of these bush lines over here where Russia's advancing. So those could be pretty accurately targeted either by Ukrainian drones, small quadcopters, or maybe some of the larger drones that they have produced or shipped from outside of the country, or by the previously mentioned artillery. So that's part of why the Russian columns aren't able to advance in these open fields. So then they mainly have to rely on just small scouting units, or just like small groups, which is what they were doing, the Wagner group, what they were doing in Bakhmut and around Vuhledar, which was so effective. So it's probably the best course of action for the Russians right now, because these large offensives through open fields in a certain area of the front line, not a broad offensive, just like a localized assault, it's not being very effective. Like clearly we've seen that the Russians are not able to break through the line of the coal mine. They were not able to even take the dairy farm or the grain elevator, and they were not able to secure full control of the dachas or of Vuhledar itself. And so if that was the goal, then there has to be a rethinking the strategy. You can't just send off certain groups of men with infantry fighting vehicles, or I don't know, BMP-3s, or with T-80 tanks like I have in some of these videos where you see that the Ukrainian artillery is engaging with these T-80 tanks and actually destroying them in some cases. You can't just keep on doing that and sending them in the same direction, expecting that there will be some sort of different result. The Ukrainians in Vuhledar, they have very dense fortifications. They have a lot of manpower at this point because a lot of the units have been moved in to stabilize the front line, especially from the 72nd Mechanized Brigade. A lot of their artillery units have been moved in, and there's actually a video from French media showing how they were firing the Caesars. They probably are being launched from Kurakove, which is not that far away from the front line. It's a good base for the Caesars to be launched from, so it's pretty far away from the front line, but just enough to be within the range for the Excalibur projectile munitions. And what's so good about the Caesars is that they can conduct these scout and scoop maneuvers, so they're able to fire shells and then quickly maneuver out of their original positions, which prevents Russia from launching counter battery at those artillery positions. So that's one of the reasons why Caesars are so good, and it's part of the reason why Russia has not been able to advance in this area. And so if we're looking at the past few days, we've seen basically no advances. Just I've added a few more markers of geolocated videos here of Ukraine are engaging in Russian positions. But at this point, the front line is just to the south of the dachas, and the Russians have not been able to advance much. If we go up a bit north, there has been some talk about the Donetsk sector. The Russians, according to Russian sources, were able to take over 2 platoon outposts around Pervomaiske. I do probably believe that at this point the Russians have solidified control over this bulge over here, which means that they have control of all the fields that are to the east of Pervomaiske, which means that they could apply pressure onto the town. But in terms of like a large-scale attack in this direction, you're not really seeing it. In the Avdiivka direction, we did receive reports of Russia trying to conduct offensive activity. It might have been localized assaults, but we did see footage that was released by this unit called I think it was the 501st Separate Battalion. I think this is of the 36th Brigade. So they released some footage showing how they were engaging Russian tanks and Russian infantry fighting vehicles as they were advancing through these open fields. So again, it's a very similar story to Zaporizhzhia and Vuhledar. You can't just advance through these open fields towards fortified areas and expect the same thing to occur in every single case. So no, we haven't seen any sort of progress in Avdiivka just yet. Although I will say the Ukrainian general staff, they are reporting that Russia is building up in the Avdiivka direction, and that they do expect some sort of offensive activity over the next few months in that area. If you go north, this is where Russia's had the most success over the past few weeks. So in this area, we have the Russians basically consolidating control over the forested area, approaching the T-0504 road, which is basically under Russian fire control already. And they're approaching Ivanivske based on this geolocated footage, which shows that the Russians have advanced. You can see here Tactical Group Atom, which is a reconnaissance unit and a sabotage unit. You could say they use small drones just to harass advancing Russian columns. They released footage, and you can see that the footage is from pretty close to Ivanivske of a Ukrainian tank fighting against some Russian infantry that was advancing in small groups. And so now you can see that they're dangerously close to Ivanivske, first of all, but they're also very close to the Bakhmut suburbs. So once the Bakhmut suburbs are taken over, that will sever the connection between Ivanivske and Bakhmut. And you have large Ukrainian garrisons in both the Bakhmut suburbs and Ivanivske. And you need to have some sort of coordination and consolidation between them. So if you're able to cut that off, then it makes it more difficult to conduct organized defensive warfare. It would also give the Russians an opportunity to advance into the city if they wanted, or to the north towards Kromove, where you have really the last supply route that is working efficiently and effectively for the Ukrainians at this point. We actually have this geolocated video of the last road to Bakhmut that is under Ukrainian control. You can see how it's still intact, so the Russians haven't really been shelling it, and cars are able to pass through without any interference by the Russians just yet. Although, once the Russians are able to get consolidated control of Ivanivske and the suburbs over here where you have some Ukrainian fortifications, it'll be very difficult for Ukraine to continue sending supplies through this town, Kromove, into Bakhmut. But if you zoom in a little more, you see that there are some minor roads that branch out of the TO-504 road and then link up to Kromove and then go into Bakhmut. I don't think those roads could be used at the moment because of the Wagner Group presence in the forests, which is insanely close to the road. So that's probably off the table right now. If you're looking into alternatives that could be used by Ukraine as a means by which to enter Bakhmut, maybe this rail line could be used. Maybe there's a road adjacent to it. But again, these are very small paths that probably can't be used by larger vehicles or tanks or anything that's towed. Maybe by just like a regular car. But that's not really enough in this sort of warfare. Maybe this road over here, you see this road that comes from Dubove, Vasilivka, and goes through Berkhivka, and then goes into the northern district of Bakhmut. Maybe this one could work. But again, it's a smaller one, and it's pretty close to the front line as well. So all in all, it's not looking good. If you go into the northern district of Bakhmut, we now have visual footage to confirm that the Russians are in really, I guess, 60%, maybe even more control of Miaskombinat district. The footage from RT shows that the Russians are in the school. It's called school number 4. You can see there's like house fighting. The fighting has now reached the meat processing plant, and so the Russians are one by one gradually taking over these residential blocks in the northern district. Now, interestingly, the Russians have also been able to gain a foothold in the northernmost district of the Bakhmut city. So it's called the Stupki district. It's the one where you have the rail hub, and you have also some other commercial centers, but it is sort of narrow. It's basically based around one key road and that rail line, and so it's more vertical in nature, which means it can be attacked on a broad front by the Russians. As you can see, the Russians, would have to cross the Bakhmutovka River, which is a natural barrier, but they would be able to cross it over. And then once they crossed over, they would be able to attack the district on a broad line, which would make defending it much more difficult and would lead to holes being cracked pretty quickly. And so now the Russians have penetrated from the north using their positions in this garden center. They were able to cross past the E40 road and reach the northern blocks of the district. So I'm assuming now they're just going to go one by one and clear out all of them. And then once they do that, they're going to be able to flank Bakhmut from the north, which will present a major threat to for the Ukrainian grouping in general, because once they cross over, there aren't that many settlements that Ukraine has control of in the area. A lot of it is just open fields, and they're usually in lower elevation. You could have mechanized units passing through here. You could have fighting vehicles passing through here pretty easily. The terrain is pretty suitable for that. And so you could see flanking of Yehidny. You could see the Russians from the north trying to reach Kromove. And the Ukrainians, given the fact that most of their units are on the front line to the east, they won't be able to send a sufficient amount of men to man it on time. And if they did, then they would be stretched out so thinly that it would present a major problem across the entire front line, which would mean that they'd just be forced to retreat before they got encircled. So that's the threat that taking over the Stupki district poses for the Ukrainians. So they're going to try to prevent that. Then we're seeing that the fighting around Parasukivka, it's getting nearer and nearer to the residential areas. So you might see some developments there in the coming days. Now over here, the Russians, they have apparently broken through the Ukrainian defensive lines around Vuhledar, and they're now reaching this town called Zaporizhzhia. It's a very small town, but again, you don't have that many towns in this area. A lot of it is just rural hamlets. And once you take them over, you have pretty effective control over a large swath of open fields. And these open fields, they are adjacent to the E40 road, and this is the E40 highway. E40 highway leads to Slavyansk. And by taking over control of this area, you could secure a lot of the different ridges and a lot of the different paths that connect different towns together. So, for instance, now the Russians are attacking Vasyukivka. Once you take it over, you could just advance along the road and take over one by one all of these different minor towns. And you would try to reach the main defensive nodes and the main transport nodes that are connecting a lot of these different paths together, these junctions, like Nikiforivka. And then from there, the larger one is Ryalexandrivka. And if you're able to do that effectively, then you could really hamper Ukraine's logistical situation in Seversk without even having to attack Seversk head on. And that would force Ukraine's hand in Seversk. So in regards to Seversk, the Ukrainians are still holding on to Razulivka. They are still holding on to Fedorivka. So there's no changes to report over there. And they are still holding on to Bilohorivka, although it is contested. There's footage posted by the Ukrainians that shows them right next to the sign saying, like, welcome to Bilohorivka. So we know that they're released in the general area, which would dispute some of the claims made by the pro-Russia sources that reported that. But all in all, that is the situation on the front line. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.